Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. And that's a text message. That's amazing. Great start to the show. Well, welcome to my channel. Thank you very much for coming to see us today. I've obviously got the Magic Bollocks on, and I've obviously got and even better start to the show. There we go. That's better. Actually tell what's going on. Right, we've got Magic Bollocks with us today. We've also got the Laughing Ogre with us today as well. So it's just a normal show, but on my channel, I've got my watermark on there as well. That's covering Magic Bollocks' face. So that's amazing. Quite happy with that. How's everybody doing today then?
Oh, you really know how to make a girl feel welcome. Common sense.
It's not like you don't turn them around as well, mate. You
never.
Don't look at their faces.
Never. Never. Not once in my life.
Yeah. My fucking mother-in-law's a bloody right bitch.
Oh dear, we're going to keep this totally clean as well. That last
I'm sorry. I had to do it. I was trying to use how I was, and I was just trying to play Magic Box. I just saw that on Melly on the telly, and I thought I'd try it. It didn't probably go over well.
No, it sounded beautiful, Mr. Ogre. Very poetic.
Right. Well, we've got a nice little story to start off with, I suppose, which is the Brazil story. But first of all, I need to actually make sure that I'm screen sharing before I actually do anything. Sharing, share. Oh, Brazil. There we go. Right, as you can see on this one, you got Lula, President's Comeback Campaign. Yes, the leftist icon is determined to run in October's election despite failing to overturn a corruption conviction, which I find very, very interesting for myself anyway.
Another commie with a beard.
They've all got beards. They've all got beards. They wouldn't be communists without a beard.
Easy. All right.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. I didn't see that.
Hashtag not all.
In this case.
Hashtag me too.
Yeah.
All right.
He's been raped. Right, okay, let's carry on. Right, leftist icon Luiz, I'm not going to say that, Lula da Silva is determined to run in Brazil's presidential election, despite his failure to overturn a corruption conviction that will likely bar him from the race. He has full confidence of Brazil's Workers' Party and Labour leaders who insist he will be their candidate in October's poll, despite the threat of exclusion. That's interesting, isn't it? Brazil's Workers' Party and Labour leaders. Very interesting. I wonder why that was particularly thrown in there. All right. He has the full confidence. Yeah, we've read that. On Thursday, a Brazilian court approved the seizure of the two-term former president's passport on the eve of a planned trip by Lulu to Africa. The public, Lulu, I'm going to get these names wrong completely, and I don't even know it's the same name. 72 remains popular, although not everyone is convinced. And it just goes to show the level of propaganda. If somebody that's convicted of corruption is still popular.
Hey, somebody just showed up.
Yeah, we got a guest. Common sense.
It's
John, I thought he died.
No, I'm here. I finally made it.
Yay, on the offensive. How you doing, brother?
I'm all right. I almost pulled off the same trick I did as Monday. I almost fell asleep again, but I didn't. So, yeah, it's good to be here, chaps. How are you all doing?
Not bad.
Not too bad, my friend. Not too bad.
Really great. I'm glad you're here. You're a fit young lad that my wife likes, and she doesn't like most dudes on the internet. So I'm glad you're here. When she listens back, except for Magic Bollocks and Common Sense guys. but I'm sorry, but especially Magic Bollocks. That's what I meant.
Thank you.
But yeah, but she'll be happy to see that you're here whenever. For some reason, since you did your face reveal, she's just addicted to watching your content. I'm sure it's completely, above board.
It's definitely to do with your content, nothing to do with your face on the offensive. Nothing to do with that.
Yeah, sure.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the show today, my friend. As I'm sure I've said to you before, I was wanted to talk to you about, should we say, how the internet seems to be shifting to a right-thinking mentality.
Yeah, very interesting, isn't it?
It is.
Do you think that that's actually happening, or is it just a couple of channels?
I actually honestly think that the internet in itself is actually perceiving to have a shift. I think more and more people are accepting the point of saying like race is real and things like that. And I think that's a major issue that was stopping people from going over to the right, for instance. And I think a lot more people are accepting the basic ideas, not necessarily the full frontal right ideas, but just the basic ideas and premises of things. And I think that's where everybody's leaning to that way now.
Yeah, I mean, on the question of race being real, I mean, that's just, that's a scientific fact. What you do with that is kind of determines your politics, right? Because if you're going to continue to argue, you could continue to argue, like from a liberal perspective, hey, but we should treat everyone like individuals, and
exactly, which is my position on that.
Really, not anything that's a big deal, and blah blah blah. Or you could say, well, therefore, we need to cut off all immigration from sub-Saharan Africa. And then you'd be a right winger, wouldn't you? So
yeah, I think you'd definitely be full right winger.
Sorry,
I think you'd definitely be a full right winger at that point to almost hit the sort of standards when you're trying to say that there are different places and different sub-Saharan like places like Africa and things like that have different forces of IQ. Now, it's good to point it out. But if you were to take that person away from that culture and that area, would that person have the same IQ? I know there's no scientific evidence to back this up apart from Nigerians, but would you classify that as a sub-Saharan African culture anyway?
I don't think Nigerians are sub-Saharan Africans, are they?
No, that's why I said I don't think so.
I'm an expert on this, but I don't think they are. And also, in the West, we get like the most intelligent Nigerians, don't we?
Yeah, especially in Africa. Especially in America. They keep on
like lawyers and doctors and stuff. Yeah. No, but take Sam Harris. He totally accepts that race is real. He had Charles Murray on his show. They discussed it at length. And he's just like, I don't care. I'm going to treat people as individuals, but you can't lie about this stuff. And it's important to be honest about these things because, in the future, we might be able to, especially when we completely, when we work out, when we map all the genes to all the phenotypes, we work out, that intelligence is controlled by these 3 genes or whatever. We might be able to raise IQ through drugs, and we might be able to eradicate loads of diseases that women have. So we kind of have to be honest about these things, or else we could be holding back medical science. I think that's his view.
IQ is static. IQ is static. I mean, that's scientific. It's static. It doesn't matter where you're from. They have regional IQ tests that will adjust for that. If your IQ is, if your IQ is 78 when you're 15 years old or 12 years old, I'm sorry, but your IQ is going to be that for the rest of your life. It's just the way it is. The idea that it can be changed.
That's true now. No, that's true now.
I know, but you said drugs. I thought of, I don't want to take too much time, but I thought of a person named Pinkwater. Pinkwater is the author's name. And he talked about a time in a book that I liked when I was a kid, when we may be able to eat a breakfast cereal or possibly a gooey cheese pizza with the right combination of what he called them as vitamins and amino acids, but in this case, drugs that may make us smarter or possibly allow us to learn trigonometry while we enjoyed our morning, toasted oats. But other than that, in lieu of that, a drug that will make us smarter, our IQs won't change.
Okay, that currently, yes, I'm talking about like maybe in 20 years, they have a breakthrough. They know which genes control intelligence, and they can, like, when the woman's pregnant, say, they can give her injections, and that will mean that every single future human being just has a baseline of 100 for their IQ. And that would be, that'd be a pretty incredible thing. And if we're going to deny that IQ exists and that intelligence is genetic, we're never going to allow this kind of research that's required to develop those kind of medical breakthroughs. I don't see why, I'm pretty sure we will get to the stage where parents can say, yes, I want blue eyes. Yes, I want, I want this and I want that in my baby. I think that seems reasonable. Once we learn.
Is it ethical though to do that?
I don't know. Why not?
Well, if I may press him, so do you not believe that IQ is because we were talking the other day, and I think I actually shut down Common Sense or someone. So if he shuts me down now, that's fine. I don't remember who it was. It's actually a Memes of Destruction, so I may be safe. But do you? I mean, nature nurture. Because I think you were listening to this. Now you'll know where I'm going, Common Sense. But nature nurture, that idea. Would you say? In some cases, I would vehemently be for nurture. If you have diabetes and you're 30 years old and you're 60 pounds overweight and you eat chicken fried steak 3 times a day, you got diabetes because you earned it. It's a disease that you earned. You didn't get it or catch it. So it's not hereditary. But this is where I draw the line at nature nurture. So let me just boil this down, because it's hard for me to say this without being accused of being a racist on the offensive. But do you believe that intelligence is not regional / inherited?
It's hereditary. I think it's something like 50 to 80%.
It's just before you go any further, Naked Ape, when he debated Kraut and T about it, the social sciences and the social studies, as well as some form of biological research papers, go to the point of saying that it's only up to 50%. And the other 50% is likely to be the nurture. And obviously 50% of nature. So a lot of scientists are believing that it's 50-50.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I will go with what they say. But yeah, we cannot educate people in schools in good environments and turn everybody into Einsteins. You're born with a potential.
Cheers. That made it clear for me. Thank you, sir, for that clarification.
Yeah. So I'm basically on board with the honest scientists who say, yeah, it's hereditary and you cannot turn yourself into an Einstein. And obviously, if you abuse a kid, you can lower a kid's IQ by abusing them, and by if a child is born in a famine, they may never reach their potential IQ. But yeah, I mean, some people are born dumb and some people are born smart, and some kids are born good at sport and some kids are just crap at sport, and that's life.
Yeah, that's just a human condition, isn't it? Just human genetics. Some are good, some are bad.
And different population groups that have been in isolation from one another for thousands of years are phenotypically different in a multitude of ways, and that is also life. And one of the ways that groups differ is in their average intelligence. And no 2 population groups are going to be the same.
Well, no 2 people are going to be the same, even in the same population groups.
Sorry, I missed that, mate.
I said even in the same population groups or the same ethnic groups, there's still not going to be 2 people that are the same. That's why I never understood the difference in races. I know obviously with the bell curve, you can cluster people in that same positions and you can gain averages, but nobody ever fits into a particular box, so to speak. And I think a lot of people always forget that. I mean, it's easy to describe people as that, but people never normally go, oh, there is smart scientists. And I think people forget that.
I think you're right that people certainly will try and downplay that fact. They don't want to talk about African geniuses necessarily, or at least that's not particularly a focus in the alt-right, is it? Hey, let's have a chat about the geniuses coming out of Africa. But
just a quick question.
Understandable. I think this sort of why the group average is understandable when you look at certain countries that have huge problems, mass poverty, very little infrastructure, and you're trying to make an immigration policy. It is understandable that people think, look, let's just be realistic about what this group is like and say, you can't come here. And I know that that's a bit harsh, but
or at least limit them so only a small amount of refugees can go. And why is it so many refugees flounder to one particular place? Why is it that they don't go to Spain but they go to France? places like that. I think there might be something to do with a welfare system. I'm not sure on that one.
Well, I think that one's easy common sense, is because France is a lot nearer to us than Spain is.
They also have a welfare system as well. I was being facetious when I was speaking.
Yeah. I think it's whatever one's got the closest to the most generous welfare system, obviously.
Yeah, that's true. Very, very true. But
I tell you what, it takes a certain amount of cojones to do, and I don't think I'm doxing anybody to do, so I'll leave it vague, to do what On the Offensive has done and move from merry old England to some faraway eastern land. It takes a lot more cojones to do that than it does to move from Syria to merry old England.
Yeah, okay, maybe. I saw when I was in Europe, I was driving with my wife, we were going through Italy. This is last year in September. And we were in Tuscany, in the middle of nowhere, one of those areas where there are just a couple of restaurants, of roadside restaurants, and that's about it. You know, you could walk and not meet anybody for hours. And we saw a huge group of Africans carrying bin liners with all of their property inside. I assume that's all that they had, just walking through the field. Huh?
What? I'm sorry, I should have stayed muted. In Tuscany.
Yeah, Italy's overrun.
In Italy.
Yeah, Italy's overrun with migrants at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, these people, right, they come in from Africa at the shortest distance. And actually, if you check a map from one point in northern Africa to get to Sicily, it's not that far. And then they walk up through Italy, and then they aim for those big welfare states of Germany, Sweden. These are very popular countries. But yeah, I mean, but looking at these people, though, I mean, well, obviously, first it was shock. But then you think, God, the desperation. Yeah. They're walking through Italy, and they've got, you know, you hear the stories of them getting in these rubber dinghies, and a lot of people drown. You know, so 6,000 people a year drown making this journey. You know, I do think that these people have to be sent home, but I feel for them. I mean, they're desperate.
Well, they're definitely desperate, but I don't think it's to the extent of what we think it is. Because, can I ask you a question on that point? How many of them were men and how many of them were women? And I bet they disproportionately were men.
Yes, they were mostly men. A couple of women with them. I didn't see any children either.
See, that in itself just makes me question, well, fair enough, I can understand desperation, but surely that would be desperation of taking your family with you and trying to make a better life for your family, not just for yourself.
Well, what they're doing is that they're going to get a job, or they're going to, well, more likely they're going to become, they're going to get asylum, and they're going to become sponges on the state, and then they'll be able to bring their children over safely, and the German taxpayer will pay for it. I think I read the other day that something like 800,000 people may be eligible for asylum via family reunification laws in Germany by the middle of this year. So all these new migrants will then be able to say, hey, you know, I've been here for a while. Can I bring my family over? And they'll be allowed to do it. Yeah. So this is where the men go first. The men make the journey, settle somewhere. Maybe they get work, maybe they don't. I think usually they don't. And then they bring their family over safely, and that gets paid for by the German taxpayer.
Yeah. Just bonkers, isn't it? Yeah. What are the actual employment? Sorry, Mr. Yeah. What are the employment prospects of these supposed refugees? Because I've seen stats that say that only 2% of the migrants that actually brought in 2015 have actually found work.
Was that a question to me?
Yes.
Not good, I'd say. Their employment prospects, not good. I mean, we have service economies. I don't think we really need very low skilled, uneducated, and let's be honest, in many cases, low IQ people coming in to, you know, what can they do? Manual laboring jobs? There's not a lot of them around, at least in England there aren't.
And
No,
even if there was, it would be a case of it would be the national population, wherever they would be, to be able to take up the labouring jobs anyway. But because they're there, that means that the labouring jobs are no longer taken up by the national people that are there, which means that more people are now unemployed.
Yeah. Oh, and here's another issue. You take a lad that grows up. I'm so off on my town names in England, so I hope I hit this right. Suffolk, I think that's a little town. You take a farm boy. Let's just say a farm boy in England. Okay, he goes to a small public school. The whole time he's working, he's raising sheep, but he's also working on the tractor. He's working on the truck and the car and everything, and the four-wheeler. Everything. He's keeping it. He learns to tinker. That's a wonderful English thing, to tinker. It is too. You lot have invented bloody everything by tinkering. So he learns to do these things. So now he wants to migrate to the city, but there's an issue with identity politics. He's confronted with a lot of other people that are there that may fill a quota. Now, they may have no appreciable skill whatsoever. They may, I mean, we could even leave IQ out of it, but I think that was a wonderful point on the offensive. But let's just leave that out of it and say that they grew up in a mud hut. With all due respect, hey, people got to live with their live. Just so I don't want to say that again, but just bear with me. They grew up in a mud hut. They grew up with donkeys and horses and shanks mare, as we say. In other words, their own feet and legs to move them thus and yon, hither and yon. They don't know how to work on tinker. That tinkering to them was fashioning an old rubber tire into sandals that they could wear with a soda bottle for the thong and for the toes. And so when we look at this, it's a double negative in all kinds of ways. These people, let me make it very brief. These people could also be creative and could do things in their own communities, but they're exported to other communities that can't use them. They have people that could fill all the places that they could fill. And in the end, it is a complete net loss for everyone. That's my humble opinion.
I think you're right. Yeah, we've heard of the phenomenon of the brain drain.
Yeah,
which I think is true. I mean, the average IQ of these nations is probably lowered by the fact that a lot of the intelligent people leave, and these countries desperately need smart people there to help build them. And none of these people are gone. But you're right, Oger, the idea of what they've experienced, what skills they have. There is a huge gap between your average Somali and your average Brit.
Well, if I may press you, would there be any solution for this? Because we see this happening where you're at, there's not a bunch of English people flooding in there. I doubt it's even an issue. They probably have something in place. So maybe from your own experiences, is there a measurement we could implement that would stop this problem, draining their intelligent people and destroying our Western culture?
Well, last time I was on your show, I was just like, we need to have some mass deportations, and that was definitely not very popular. But I don't think there's really any other way to get. I used to think, God, that sounds harsh as well, and it's it sounds fascist, doesn't it? Yeah, round them up, get rid of them. But I'm not suggesting we don't treat these people with dignity, or that we are mean to them or whatever. But you can't just allow hundreds of thousands of people to flood into your country, especially the ones who come in illegally and who are making very dubious claims for asylum. And I don't really buy it that any of them are refugees, to be honest. I think most of them are economic migrants, and yeah, they have to go home, and we can send them on their way. I mean, they don't have a right to be there, right? I live in Vietnam, as has been brought up earlier. I don't have a right to be in Vietnam. I'm allowed to stay here by the Vietnamese government because I follow visa rules and I follow their laws and so on and so forth. If at any moment the Vietnamese government decided to remove me, I don't think I'd have a logical or a moral leg to stand on if I was to start, well, I've got a right to be in your country. I don't have any right to be here. I'm not Vietnamese.
Well, and besides, they'd throw you out anyway. You know, it's only Western countries that get hectored into that kind of mindset. If you tried that in Vietnam and you were like, but I've got rights, and now you've broken the law in some way, you've overstayed your visa, they laugh at you, stamp your pass denied, and kick you out. As simple as that. And why not? I don't think that's a bad thing, by the way.
I think that is the right of the government of that nation, and the government should be putting its citizens first, and to allow such mass importation of people is removing the freedom of self-determination from the citizens, because nobody wants their community to turn into a Pakistani ghetto or a mini Somalia. Nobody would actually choose that for their community. And from a libertarian perspective, we believe in freedom of association and the right to include and exclude whom you please. So when that comes to a community, well, they don't want their town turning into mini Somalia. You are denying them their right to self-determination if you allow this mass immigration, which is, a moral crime against the people of Britain. It's a moral crime against the Germans. So
do you think
those grounds, really sort of deportation is sort of correcting the record?
That's fine. Do you think that with what we're actually talking about, do you think that's the reason why people, at least on the internet at the moment, and the reason why I say the internet at the moment is because more people are more confident to be able to talk on the internet because of anonymity. But do you think that's the reason why people are shifting towards a right view? Because if they go to the left and stay with the left, then they're going further to this multiculturalism, where they don't actually want multiculturalism anymore. They want to make sure that they have work for themselves and be able to look after themselves in their own nations. And I think that might be the reason why people are going to the right a bit more, just purely on immigration politics.
This guy, Magic Bollocks, you were about to say something.
No, I'm listening, mate. I was going to say with common sense about how this all ties nicely back into his original message about, do you think this is the having the effect on, as he perceives it, as more people leaning more right leaning on the internet than it has been up till now? I mean, I can point at my own self, as these boys, as I've told them many times, I was a socialist in my 20s. And now, as a man in his late 30s, I am anything but. I would consider my politics these days to be centre-right. And I would say that is mostly because of stuff I've learned thanks to the internet. And
cheers.
With what all this happening, especially in Europe, what has been happening, when you get sort of like the left in the West now, which is a combination of corporatist, lobbyist interests and just far left Marxist morons, I think it's getting harder and harder for the average person to associate with the left, because they just don't buy into all this shit that apparently we need to let all these people in. We need these people because we've got all these job shortages that we don't have. And I suppose really the right is becoming in a way a sort of like a natural home for the disinfected, say, working and middle class, I suppose.
Yeah. And the silliest argument of all is we need these people because it's enriching our countries.
Oh,
and that is so clearly a lie. It's just so, really, how are we being enriched? With higher rape rates, with more violent crime, with acid attacks, with gangs carrying knives, intimidating old women, with entire communities leaving the places that have been their communities for hundreds of years. Places like Newham in London going from 97% white British in 1997 to today being 16% white British, and it's a Bangladeshi area. Oh, were the people of Newham enriched? I mean, give me a goddamn break. This is just such a lie. And I agree with both of you that the left's position on many of these things is just untenable to your average, reasonable, rational human being. But I'm not sure if we're really, I like to say positive, and I'm a real right winger, so I'm always like, come on, chaps, we're winning, but I'm a little hesitant to say that the internet is going right wing. Maybe in our circles,
What about Europe then? What about Europe then? As there's over 7 countries now that want to leave Europe and is against the idea of open borders and open immigration.
Yeah, well, you know, it's hopefully we are going right. I'm just a little tentative before I say something that, like, as a fact, like the internet's going right wing or Europe's going right wing or whatever. I hope that's the case. It does seem that, you know, I think even a lot of lefties don't want all these people in their countries either. I mean, there are a lot of lefties who can be very honest, for instance, about the religion of Islam, and they're well aware that that is a nasty ideology, and that the Islamic
do you think that the idea of, just for instance, using that point of Islam, do you think that people would be under that impression of going, well, for immigration, I'll use this term as loosely as possible, but obviously not how it sounds, those type of people coming in, and because I don't want them type of people coming in, I'm going to use what the right's going, because they're the only ones talking about it. And it's not necessarily a conscientious shift, but almost a force of a shift, because they're the only ones talking about it. I'm willing to do something.
You know, maybe it depends. It depends on a lot of things. But it's easy to be blissfully ignorant to a lot of what's going on with regards to the migrant crisis if you yourself are not affected. So my parents, they live in a really nice village in the English countryside. There are no migrants there. You know, everybody's a white Brit. You walk around and people say cheerio, you know, when they say goodbye, right? People say things like that. And you walk down the road, everyone's nice, everybody walks their dogs, and my old man, he votes Tory, but he really is completely clueless as to what's going on in Europe. He just doesn't think about it. I bring up things about, you know, like the rape in Cologne and stuff like that. He doesn't have a clue. It's just not on his mind. You know, he's like, oh, I'm going to work. Yeah, I'll vote Tory. I kind of want limited government. It's, you know, it's not very salient. The stuff that we talk about online, it's not very salient for them. I think like baby boomers especially can just remain lefties or like very moderate sort of Theresa May right wingers, you know.
I think that's a little bit weird, because on a certain person that we've had on the channel before who used to be one of our co-hosts, I won't say the name, but I'm sure everybody understands who I mean by that point. Most of his demographic are people that are slightly of an older disposition, not necessarily baby boomers, but people that are in their 40s and 50s. I even myself have people that are that type of age as well on some of my demographics. Now, I'm sure you would do as well on some of yours as well. But I just wanted to point out that I don't think it's just a case of that. I think that's the reason why I said the internet, or feel as a theory, that the internet is the point that it's now shifting, because people are now changing their ideas and they're looking for like this idea of liberalist or the alt-right or whatever sort of terminology or banner you want to hide behind, so to speak. Yeah. But is able to talk about the actual proper issues that are actually plaguing their issues in their minds at the moment. And unfortunately, if you're right of centre, they're the only ones talking about immigration and proper politics. They're actually hurting the common man and the common person.
Yeah, you know, but then outside of the internet, the left run everything, and you know, even a conservative government can't be conservative. They can't be honest about anything. They can't express traditional conservative ideas because they have to be politically correct.
But change takes time, though. It's the same as YouTube. It's the same as YouTube. Google's obviously owning YouTube, and yet it tried to censor people, but yet it hasn't been able to do that. Yes, I still know that it's still trying to change different bits and pieces, but people like me and you are still talking. We're still producing videos. People like Millennial Woes are still out there doing what they want to do, and so on and so forth. Baker Alaska and whoever knows what else you want to use. But they're still out there and they're still talking, using the platform. So I think the shift is starting from the internet, and I think it will change into real life soon.
I think another change that's definitely happening is just the rise of live streams. And live streams lend themselves at least to people who are honest about stuff. Like if you're trying to be dishonest in your politics on a live stream, you're going to get killed. You know, there'll be someone there who'll take you on, debate you, and make you look like a fool on air. So, you know, in front of, well, if you're on the Andy Borski show, you're going to be in front of thousands of people, and you're going to look like a twat if you start pretending that race isn't real.
Hey. I'd like to put our boy up against him. Do you know what? It's just Sargon got sucked in. I think I can speak for Magic Bollocks and say that, you know, we'd get in his corner, you know, we'd be like, I'll be his second. And then, you know, of course, Magic Bollocks would be the cut man. And we'd be in his corner, but we put, hey, if Spencer would like to come on here, common sense guy, and I'm speaking for him, but he'll tell you in a second. Hey, bring it on, bitches.
Well, again, like I've said before, is that a lot of people go into these debates with completely the wrong attitude, which is too many people go into a debate with the intention of I'm going to win rather than I'm going to have a debate.
Yeah,
I think that's the difference with someone like myself and Common Sense, is that we don't have that attitude, which is that if somebody tells us something we didn't know and, you know, proves us wrong, that's fine. It's okay to accept it. But there was a hell of a lot of sort of one-upmanship after that debate, and it couldn't have come a worse time really after all the Croughton tea malarkey as well. So it did. It took a very nasty knock for the skeptic community. But my simple attitude is like as we're doing now, we're just talking about ideas and our own points of view, and we're not going to go out of this one thinking we one-upped each other. It's just that if you can tell me something on the offensive that I don't know or got wrong, I'm fine. If I can tell you something, you know, you didn't know, I'd hope the same. And, you know, I just think that's that would be the better attitude if people have these debates, you know, not going in, not trying to insult each other, not trying to, you know, one-up each other, just talk.
I felt that Sargon's attitude was not just one of I'm going to win, but like I'm going to get it. You know, I'm going to get it.
Yeah.
I thought he was very arrogant. I thought Sargon was very arrogant in that debate. I don't think he tried to the point. I think he had a game plan and he tried to stick to it. And though I wouldn't say that Spencer's very good at debating, but he knows his points. He knows his points very well, and he was able to maneuver around Sargon's 1 point every time.
He manipulated him. And Common Sense, look, if this would have been Sargon pre-fame, and I say this with all due respect, he's been on the channel. I love Sargon. I watch his stuff every week. And I'm not going to make any more apology for that. I'm just going to be honest. Had it been that he didn't do what On the Offensive just said and come in with this idea, and if it would have been 6 years ago, in fact 8 years ago, when he was really hardly known, he would have done a good job, because I think that he came into it, and as we've stated, look, I was in the debate team when I was in grade school. All through college, my whole life. The number one thing you want to avoid is you don't go in it to win it. You go in prepared. Exactly. That's the thing that they told us. They drilled into us. Go prepared. As long as you're prepared, you have your tort and your retort all ready. Anyway, there you go.
No, I completely agree with you. I was just saying, from my honest opinion, I'm obviously not a Sargonite per se, but I'm close as you could do without throwing the name out there. But I would say that I don't think Sargon did very well in there. I think at best he did a draw. I don't think he won. Don't think he won the debate at all. I think he was very poor in the debate.
Oh, he lost because he went at it at an emotional angle with a guy that basically has emotions on his side, and he's very experienced.
Yeah, and what I was trying to get at was trying to say that I think that this will actually help Sargon, where people actually say, oh no, he's falling now. I think this has made him re-motivate himself to be able to actually reevaluate his positions. And I think that's where the liberalist movements come from. Though it hasn't necessarily gone anywhere, but I think this has helped him. And I think it's made him realize, and everybody else realize, he's just a man. He's not God. He's not this omnipotent leader that knows everything and knows all. He's just a bloke. He's just another man. And I think that's actually probably made more people realize that, yeah, he's just a man and we can all do what we can do. And I think it's helped the community more than actually him winning the debate.
Best point that right there. Best point.
Can I just ask On the Offensive a little question? It's slightly related to what we were just talking about before. If I was to ask you, what do you think the actual motivation behind bringing in the mass migrants from Africa and supposedly Syria. Do you think that that was a calculated move by our establishment, or do you believe that, as some people do, is that Merkel just couldn't bear to take the negative press that would come with refusing to let these supposed refugees into Germany?
I think, I don't know. It's very tempting to fall into conspiratorial thinking on this. There's definitely a group who exist within our establishment of people who are of the ideology. You know, they ideologically are egalitarians. So
George Soros.
Right. Well, he would be one. I think that, you know, Jeremy Corbyn is probably another.
Oh, yes.
I don't think Jeremy Corbyn thinks that there's any real difference between. I don't think he gives this much thought. The incredible. If you meet people who are into anti-racism activism, they tend to be completely fucking deluded about the reality of the world. And this, of course, leads to just shoddy immigration policy. And I think that there's also, just ideology aside, just people want to be nice, don't they? So they can, you know, kind of get bullied and badgered and not want to seem too mean. And we are very politically correct in Western Europe, which means that saying no, close the borders, it takes more balls to say that than it does to say let's open them. And we've got a culture of virtue signaling and all this sort of thing. So I don't think it's a conspiracy. But moreover, I would say it's sorry, I'm waffling on here. This is sort of point two. So yeah, there is an ideological side and there is just a cultural side. But then there's just the failing of democracy, just the fact that politicians want to loot countries as quickly as possible and get what they can now, and they really don't engage in long-sighted thinking, and they're not encouraged to. They're encouraged to think about tomorrow morning's headlines and next week's poll results, and it's all a sort of day-to-day game of retaining power, and it just doesn't incentivize politicians to think from a civilizational perspective. So when they're dealing with migrants, they don't think about the next 100 years of our civilization. They just don't.
Yeah, I quite agree. It's all very short-term planning now, isn't it? And we had a gentleman on, was it 2 weeks ago? Aries, his name is, and he's a white nationalist American. And after the debate, we were discussing, you know, our theories about why, you know, we have the influx at the moment. He obviously had his theories, and he was more into the camp that you mentioned about the you know, the tin hats theories, the white genocide sort of beliefs. And I put to him, similar to what you did, which is that politicians are all completely short-term thinkers, especially like as we know in this country. They never plan beyond the next 5 years between the next election cycles. All they care about is getting re-elected. So
yeah, and it's not even their job. It's not even in their sorry for jumping.
No, carry on.
It's not their job to think of long-term stuff. That is not what they're being paid to do. Right? It's like, you know, if your boss says, I need you to do this and this and this and this and this, and that's the way you work in your company, well, that's what you do, isn't it? You don't start going, well, actually, I'm just dreaming of products we can sell in like 100 years' time. That you're going to get fired. So yes, it's all about meet that journalist, go there, visit that school. I need the budget report on this. Oh Christ, what's our response on this issue? It's all just now. That's the political process. So these people are looking for it's you can get an easy gain in the polls by doing something humanitarian. I think
that's very
true.
I have
a quick point to add to this and a quick question. Do you also think that it might be, and this is to both of you as well, whoever wants to take it up, do you think as well that with the ideologies that the left have, that the reason why they may be so short-sighted, so to speak, is because they have to break everything down into their intersections? And I use this word on purpose so that they can focus on single issues at a time rather than trying to convolute it all together. Because if you were to say, like the Channel 4 lady asking Jordan Peterson, why does your freedom of speech trump my right not to be offended? If you were to put that into context of saying something along the lines of taking the transgender issue out of there, which everybody's all hot on, and just saying, "Oh, why is it okay for you to say that I'm black instead of saying I'm white?" It's trying to convolute the actual point rather than just trying to have it a broad brush. It's trying to single everything out. And I think that's where a lot of left wing ideologies go down. And that's the reason why they have to form intersectionalization. So they can focus on that point. So they can go, well, this is bad. This is bad. If you look at it in an open point, it's not.
Yeah, I agree with that. And my belief is that it's not just one big game plan by, say a bunch of corporalists who want a certain outcome. I think it is just, you've got a lot of competing ideologues or economists or people with influence who are all roughly at the moment pulling in roughly the same direction, but with all slightly different projected outcomes. Like obviously, like you just said, common sense. We've discussed this many times about the far left ideology of, they've tried Marxism with class, now they're trying Marxism with identity. Yeah. So, like I said, obviously the white male is the oppressor at the moment. So everything that's not a white male heterosexual is the oppressed. So anything else can be used in identity politics. Whereas with, say, maybe the government, they will obviously use that to their advantage for bringing in or being allowed to bring in mass numbers of migrants, either from the European Union or in this case from, say, North Africa or wherever. And all it is short-term boost to GDP to make it look like the government's competent and actually are making the economy grow. Because obviously the more people you shove into a country, the more demand there is for goods and services. And then you've got things like the corporations, which don't necessarily subscribe to an ideology themselves. They just want more and more people into a country to help drive the cost of labor down.
Or votes.
And of course votes. Sorry, I forgot about that. So, yes. Yeah, carry on, mate.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that's being said. I mean, this is such a huge issue, and there are so many reasons why it's happening. This is a great discussion of just the multifaceted. It's a multifaceted issue, isn't it? There's just a lot. There's not one point. The one point that you can say, and there it is. That's why the migrant crisis is happening.
It's not like that episode of The Simpsons where you've got them all around the table, all plotting together. It's so many different groups who are working for a roughly same outcome, but all in different directions, really.
And most of them are left and not Republicans.
Yeah, you got it.
Yes. I was going to make a point on identity politics.
Sure, go ahead.
That you raised, Magic Bollocks. By the way, your name is fantastic. I like it.
Oh, thank you. I quite like yours as well. On the offensive bollocks.
Yeah. Identity politics gives permission to anyone with a minority status to advocate on their behalf and behalf of their ethnic group proudly and loudly, and often at the expense of the majority of us, basically. And this is seen as virtuous. So they can go on TV and say, we need the BBC to be more diverse. They'll say something like that, which means use anti-white discriminatory hiring practices. That's what I want to do. And this is virtuous when they say it, because they're caring about the little guy, and there's a hierarchy stack, and hierarchies are bad, and we need to make everybody equal, and blah 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 blah. Nonsense, right? But also they have their activist organizations, like every single minority group in England. There's a multitude of these activist groups that have the earpiece of government ministers. That government ministers will go and meet the Muslim Council of Britain and take pictures with these people. These people have horrific views and connect.
You want to hear something that's funny that goes completely with what you're saying? Labour Party recently did a gathering, a meeting, and what they call BAM people, so Black, Asians, mixed race, blah blah blah, were at £20 to come in. White people, 30. They were discriminating against white people by adding the price up, and that's for people that are supposed to be equal for everybody.
Yes, it's disgusting to us, but okay. But the thing is, these activist organizations are getting the earpiece. These people all want more migrants. And they've been given a lot more political sway because of identity politics. That was the end of that point. That was what I was going to wrap up with.
Yeah. And it's, again, it's working to a means by somebody else, isn't it? They don't realize, these fucking useful idiots, that they are actually playing into what they perceive to be as the enemy's hands anyway. Because one of the things that makes me laugh is, if you look back to, was it 2010, 2011, when we had the Occupy Wall Street movement, and you had all these, and you also had them in this country as well, didn't you? You had them all sitting around Westminster, you know, supposedly protesting against the City of London. And the remnants of Occupy ended up becoming part of the anti-Brexit protest that happened in the aftermath of the Brexit vote. And when a few of these lot were actually asked about it, when, you know, they were questioned on the street saying, oh, we're former Occupy movement members, they were saying, well, do you know what the three main backers of the Remain campaign? And they went, oh, it's obviously some fascist far-right group. And they went, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and Morgan Stanley. And they went... And they just literally went, don't believe you, and walked off. So the whole hypocrisy of it, which is they will support anything that they're told is a left-wing cause. They don't give a shit who's behind it or running it, even if it goes completely counter to their narrative.
Yeah. I think you're right that it's much easier to be a lefty if you're not really engaged in deep political thought.
I think it's much better to be a lefty these days if you've got the money to afford to be, isn't it? Because you can also afford to be a hypocrite. Socialist. Yeah. You can be a Lily Allen or a Charlotte Church or a Gary Lineker or any of these other wankers who can go on Twitter and virtue signal all day, knowing that none of these things they're calling for will ever affect them at all.
No, and we call them limousine liberals also.
Yeah.
Bastards. These lily-livered, sycophantic, simpering, rictorous, flashing, just the unbelievable mewing mass of Hollywood that comes out there. It's like you see a field of zombies coming at you, and yet there's this one that you never dream. Suzanne Summers stands up and says, "You know what? I like to see my country doing good. It'll probably end my career." And she may have been joking, because the last thing I knew is Thigh Master, because we could all see camel toe, was the last thing she ever did. But she's there, and it's just, oh man, I don't know what else to say.
I find it really interesting that you bring that up, because I find that absolutely an extremely massively good point. Whenever the left want to endorse something, they go to celebrities. Whenever the right want to endorse something, they use themselves and say, I'm backing this, the politicians themselves. And I think that shows you the difference in character, that they're willing to put their name behind it. To quote good old George Foreman, I'm so proud of it, I put my name on it.
Yeah.
And we've just recently had George Foreman on the show. He now goes under an reality's temple on Earth. But look for him again, and he still sells them grills. Old Magic and I and him were talking the other day, and Magic said, "You know, George, Big George, do you still sell them grills?" And he just said, "Oh, yeah, Pinky, I do. Just make sure you don't tell people I'm Big George Foreman." But we're trying not to, but it's too late now.
I remember that one when he's on next, Mr. Ogre, and I imagine he'll be gone in seconds.
At least wait till the end of the debate for that one, please.
This is all I have to say.
Yeah. Has anybody here seen On the Offense's video where he was actually talking to an ex-Marxist?
Yes.
Yes, I found that video fascinating because of the fact that seeing it from somebody who's actually been in there, and his own admittance about how close-minded the whole movement is that once you're in it, that's the way you think, and you don't question any of the ideology. It is right, you follow it, and you will not be deterred by any other thought. And it's almost like a religion, isn't it?
It is. I felt very sorry for him, actually, when he talks about how many years of his life were made miserable by it. And that was one of the most surprising things for me, because I would have thought, being a Marxist, would be you'd feel great about yourself. Aren't I virtuous? I care about the little man. But no, to the contrary, it's apparently miserable in anything that I believe he says something like, anything you've got, someone else must be suffering or deprived of.
Yeah.
Because everything is a zero-sum game to them.
I know, it's the ideology of self-loathing and not allowing yourself to be happy and enjoy life because your happiness means someone else is suffering.
Yeah.
What a miserable existence.
Lads, I'll just be back in 2 minutes. I need to hit the toilet, all right?
Oh, no worries.
We're
probably all going to have a little leg stretch in between. I just want to take this little bit of time, if I may, Common Sense. But can I have 2 minutes? Yeah, I'm just so honored to be here. And on this, Common Sense Guy has done some other live streams. But as far as having a proper crew and running it and having a proper guest and the whole 9 yards, starting the show and the guest shows up late, the whole 9 yards. I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to ask you to press one or anything. I'm just going to say that if you enjoy this stream, I'm sorry if I didn't promote it enough. I hope that everyone that would be here is here, that I could have had something to do with. And B, if you enjoyed it, just go on ahead and, make sure that other people that I may have missed know. And let's make sure that we remember Mondays will be on my channel as soon as possible. As soon as Bollock says go, Wednesdays will be on his channel, and Fridays will be here. We will have an eclectic variety of things for you to peruse. As you can already see, Common Sense Guy's channel, the church will be completely different. On Bollock's channel, church will be completely different. On the Ogre's channel, will be completely different. So we really hope to open up this new variety for you. We really hope you enjoy. So that's all I had to do, Common Sense. Thanks for allowing me that little bit of housekeeping. Also, if you did notice, there's no super chat here, so I will do this one more time.
I need more subs.
Yeah, make sure that you sub, of course.
Go and tell another 800 of your friends to sub immediately.
Yeah.
But I'm also going to do this, and I don't even have to talk about what it is. You'll see that's there, and it's no pressure. If you got an extra £5, throw the extra £5. If you don't. We don't hector anybody and say, oh, you're watching, so therefore. No, man, we got like Binary Surfer. He's one of our most benevolent backers. And the guy, he told us today, he said he's grumpy today because he worked 60 hours this week. And so we appreciate every quid, but that's only if you can afford it. Thank you so much, those of you that have. And yeah, Lord knows, I'll tell the whole drama when it comes through Common Sense, but I just had to fill out some text forums, and I will probably be going off super chat directly and just be doing the same thing and tweeting out PayPals. Yeah. So then that's the end of the housekeeping. Thank you very much.
No worries. I'd just like to also thank Binary Surfer for coming on Monday's live stream as well, for talking about Sweden and going through some of his personal stuff. And just
he was brilliant.
Yes. I said, you read my mind there, Common Sense. I was about to say exactly the same thing. I said, Binary, you're welcome on any other time, because that was very fascinating little insight that was.
Plus he had like a very...
Plus the fact he's got a fantastic GCHQ voice.
It's very mysterious, right?
Like it does. He sounds like a proper spook to me. So,
one would say he's undercover, wouldn't he?
Well, he sounded like it was like he had that kind of voice, which is I won't be long, lads, because they're coming for me.
Yeah. He really had a very intriguing, clandestine sounding, if that can be a sound. I know that's not a normal verb, but very clandestine sounding voice, like we were in a conspiracy with him. I have to say that he was second to none.
But that's the thing, though. Technically, we were in a conspiracy theory with him because it's not being bloody reported, is it? All the stuff that's going on in Sweden is just not being reported. We got one decent story about the National Guard and the military having to maybe possibly go in to sort out gangs, but no sort of identification of how bad it really was. And then Binary Surfer, as he just says, thanks now, has literally just come out and actually been able to give us the proper 911, so to speak, on it. And absolutely amazing on it. We're very, very appreciative for that.
Yeah. And I really do wonder whether his prediction about, his contact's prediction about it kicking off badly in the summer. And so if we do, obviously we won't see it in the mainstream, but there's obviously plenty of outlets that will report it, like Drudge and Breitbart and Zero Hedge. So it will be fascinating to see if it does happen. I don't doubt it for a minute.
But remember, he made a little disclaimer and said things do spike in the summer.
Yes.
But he said, but this one could be a little bigger spike. So, one way or the other, he didn't take full credit, but I'll say if it's some big deal, on the offensive is back, it's time for me to quiet down.
Yeah, I've been back for a while. What spike are you referring to? You mean a spike in the numbers of immigrants coming in?
No, and the amount of atrocities taking place, the amount of gang violence, the amount of rapes, the amount of snatchings.
Do you want to fill him in, Common Sense?
Yeah, I'll pretty quickly do that. We had one of our subscribers on and benefactors coming on called Binary Surfer, who's in the chat at the minute. And
I got all that. Swedish guy, great voice. But yeah, what did he say?
He was saying that basically over there is a lot of gangs over there which are mostly immigrants, which are shooting people, which are raping people, forming people to have prostitutions or into prostitution rackets, forcing the police actually out of different areas as well, to the point where they're actually now talking about bringing the National Guard and the army actually into different areas to actually look after it because the police are not capable.
I thought the army thing, I thought that was fake news.
No, that's real. That's real, mate. That's real.
Jesus. Oh, my God.
They're actually losing. They're actually having to close down certain police stations because they can't hold it anymore.
Yeah.
Looks like they're going to be the first police state of Europe then.
Possibly.
Wow.
Possibly. That's how bad it is in Sweden.
Yeah, and I just asked Binary. He just responded. I was going to have him pop in to kind of say it in his own words, but he's tired. He's 60-hour week. That's 12-hour days, 5 days in a row. I don't even want to think about that myself. So we'll leave him be. And thank you so much, Binary, for coming by before. So if you could have heard it from
Sheffield just said as well, as Lothar Sheffield just said, the point where they're actually having so much ammunition, these gangs, they are dropping. You remember that story about the grenade that was found near a subway station in Stockholm?
Sorry, you talking to me. I've heard many of the grenade stories.
Yeah, they're all set by the gangs to the point where they just drop them accidentally as they're moving past.
Wow. Why are they?
Yeah, that's how bad it is.
Why did they? But are they doing that to civilians, just regular people?
No, that's the thing. The grenades hardly ever go off because they're not trying to throw the grenades. They're just so heavily armed when they're moving that it just falls off.
One rolls out. I mean, but Binary Surfer was saying that a case of 6 grenades and what did he say? Common Sense. Do you remember he say 4?
No, I think it was 1 or 2,000. I think it was 1 or 2,000 pounds.
Yeah, but for a case of 6 grenades and I think he said 4 Kalashnikovs. One, he'll tell us in the chat. But it with this combination, and here in the States, a case of 6 military grenades. You pull the pin, throw it, and it blows up. Might not sound like a big deal. That'd be. Oh man, it'd be 20,000 quid at least. That's if you knew somebody. For me to go try to buy that right now, if not that I would or could even find the channels, but if I could, guarantee it'd cost me $30,000.
Yeah, over there, 1,000 to 2,000 pounds.
That's giving it away. Oh
yeah,
God. Yeah. And that tells you too that they have this large supply, and that since you know what the price is, these guys are just dropping them on the offensive. They're just like rolling out of their. It's like you're going down the street, right, mate? And you're getting a Dogan out, and when you do, you don't notice, but you pull one out and one falls out on the pavement, but you don't notice that, right? So you just let your Dogan and travel on, carry on, but you've lost. That's how it is with grenades with this lot.
Oh, all you can do is sorry, I shouldn't laugh because it's tragic.
No, you should.
I don't even know how to respond to that. It's just so insane. It feels
to be funny.
That sounds like you'd expect that kind of story on Vice when they're in some weird obscure African country and someone goes yes and the grenade just fall out and children play with them and then the guy on Vice goes like well things got really scary so then we got the fuck out of there and you expect
yeah the cucks on Vice these days would just say oh look I've caught a fucking grenade of peace.
They've fallen far from Gavin McGinnis, man, I tell you.
The commentary on Vice is hilarious. I was watching one the other day on Liberia, and the things. Okay, direct quotes. I remember them. here are some just such eloquent, such journalism, guys. They said things like, the vibe here is like really heavy, and and then like it just got really sketchy. So we just were like, hey, should we get the fuck out? And then we got the fuck out.
Oh,
Like,
but they've got the music in the background. They've got the organ going. Boo.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's scary. Dude, oh my god, I'm freaking out. Like, I can't believe the story.
Hasn't Vice now turned into basically, not that I'm bothered about it because I believe in some sort of free drugs anyway, but basically hasn't it turned into a free drugs news organization about how to
Well, they do have Pharmacopoeia, and they do, but it's been bought out by HBO, mate.
Oh, that's why.
Yeah. Gavin McInnes and the other two guys that I don't remember their names because they're not as cool as him, and I like Gavin. They started that magazine, they started that whole thing, and then they sold it. Gavin's part was 300 million. So if you ever look at Gavin McInnes and wonder how does he do what he's doing, and he just like, oh yeah, ha ha ha, and does well. Not too long ago, his cut of that was $300 million. That's not
I think all of us would be fine on that one, wouldn't we? All of us would be quite happy with that.
I might be able to pay off a couple bills. I mean, it would probably still be tight, but just bear in mind I'm Jewish.
Oh dear. One day he's going to admit to being a Muslim, isn't he? One other question for On the Offensive, and this is slightly off topic, but what do in your various travels in the Asian continent, do you ever sort of talk to them about how they view Europe at the moment, and what's their sort of opinions on what's happening? Because there's obviously that famous word that the Chinese have developed for the white left that I can never remember, that they now use for online mocking of the West because of
it's called idiots.
I think that's the translation, isn't it? Common sense. But yeah, apparently the Chinese are now
similar to I think it would translate well to white savior. It's the virtue signaling lefty who's going to save all the minorities and people of color.
Yeah,
and I don't even have a driver's license, because I'm really green. This group, yeah. Okay, so what do Vietnamese people think about it? They're not really. I think some of them follow politics, but most Vietnamese don't. But I chat to them about it with my mates, my Vietnamese friends, and they don't understand. They just don't understand why we're doing it. They just think it sounds mental. They're right.
Yeah, they can't. In fact, they probably wonder how can these bloody Yanks that came over here and shot, bombed, and napalmed 3.5 million of us, and just was fought to the bitter, no matter what kind of tactics, whatever, they just kept coming like ants. How can these people that fought over nothing, I may add, over fucking nothing. They threw away 58,000 and murdered 3.5 million. How is it that they're now just opening their doors to let somebody else take their country over? They must think, they really, honest to God, they must think, what fools these people are.
Yes, yes. I think with America, they're very fond of America, Then there's no anger towards America. They're really, and I think they do see it as a land of opportunity. They know Vietnamese people who've gone over there. And they call them VQ, which is like Vietnamese foreigner, whatever. So they see them as like a different group now because they've been away for so long, But they're very nationalistic and a collective. They work in a very collective way. They're really, really peaceful to one another on the whole. I mean, obviously there are fights, but they're very helpful to one another, and they live in very close-knit neighborhoods. Everybody lives with their family, pretty much. Big households full of people, grandma, grandpa, and they live well. They live happy lives. A lot of people think that Vietnam is like really underdeveloped. It's not actually at all. I mean, in the countryside, you do get quite simple living, but I mean, most people. But
that richness of life you're talking about, you can't buy that.
Huh?
The richness of life you're talking about, though, and carry on, you can't buy that. Even if they're a little underdeveloped. I mean, that kind of life that you're talking about. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I admire them greatly because a lot of them can afford cosmopolitan apartment living and reject it. They don't want to do that. So you'll meet a lot of like rich young Vietnamese doctors and lawyers and entrepreneurs, and they're saving up to buy land to build a house so all their family can live together. That's like the dream. That's the dream. It's so family orientated. I admire it greatly. It's something that we've really lost in the West, because we used to be so much more connected to our siblings and our parents and extended family, what we now call the extended family. That you can't really translate extended family. They're like, what do you mean? Like a cousin you never met? Like, you're like, no, well, no, you mean like grandparents. They're like, that's family.
Yeah.
That's family. Yeah. I taught English here, so I'd ask things like, who's your best friend in your family or whatever, or who are you closest with in your family? And you get odd answers. Oh, my uncle. And you're like, what? In England, no one would ever say their uncle. Like, hardly ever. That's quite common here, because they will have grown up right next door or in the same house. Yeah. And, big happy families. It's nice.
That is kind of like our old communities, isn't it? And like, in the 50s and before, really, and especially before the war, we had a lot of, families all living in the same street and all dependent on one another.
And just after as well, up to the 60s, they were all mostly together and had to as well because of rebuilding.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because they talk about breaking.
So I was going to say, even people on the same street from the late 40s to early 60s were still living in the same houses, in big houses on the end of the street, because they were waiting for things to get rebuilt. So that was a level of community back in the day. But as everybody said on the panel, we've lost that simply because of multiculturalism, because we don't want to know where our neighbours are anymore. We haven't got the opportunity of buying a house next door to keep things in. People have to move hundreds of miles away sometimes, or at least tens of miles away.
But even then,
at a distance.
Even then, common sense. Have you noticed with even if you live in a street, I mean, as I do, I live in a street that is still predominantly the white British, but compared to if you talk to somebody of, say, a generation ago before, they would know pretty much all their neighbors. I don't really know that many. I mean, I obviously say good morning and all that when I see them, but I don't know them because the culture has changed now to people have become very isolated, haven't they? Nobody wants to necessarily get to know other people anymore. And I think part of the reason for the community spirit we used to have was because people had no choice. You needed help from your neighbors because you were so poor that, either both parents working because they desperately needed the money, and so maybe a neighbor would look after the kids, or like you said, you'd have the family living in the street. And maybe with the prosperity of the West from, say, the 60s onwards, it's kind of made us all a little bit, we don't need that anymore. So we sort of became a bit isolated.
I think as well that it's also been the case of propaganda that's come out of going, you don't know what your neighbour is. He could be a paedophile, he could be a rapist, he could be anything.
Oh, yeah.
And it's generally a he, normally.
Yeah, stranger danger. That's what they started over here.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly the same in any Western culture where we've gone down that road. So we don't want to get to know our neighbours, because if we get to know our neighbours, we might accidentally know somebody who we shouldn't know.
And the bloody shame of it is some people will get diddled when they're young. It's just the way it is.
But that's just the case that, unfortunately, the predatoristic points of those type of people, it wouldn't matter if they were next door or at the school. I mean, if you look at somebody like Ian Huntley, he'd become a fucking janitor, for fuck's sake.
Well, Jim will fix it.
Yeah, exactly. Generally, they find positions where they can do things. So it's not a case that that's going to be something that's going to matter if they're next door or not. But we've definitely lost our little sense of community. It's the same when you're in little villages where you used to have little fetes and fairs and everybody would get together to do barbecues and things like that, because I've always lived in a village or a village, and generally that's the sense of community that you used to have. You can walk down the middle of the village and you can still say hi and things like that, and you can still meet people and talk to people on the street and that, even people you don't know. You can still do that in some villages. But you go to any sort of city, everybody's got their head down, looking straight ahead and going. Nobody wants to talk. Nobody wants to say hi. Everybody's worried about what the other person's going to be doing. I think that has a lot to do with stranger danger, as we've said, and I think that has a lot to do with immigrants as well.
Yeah, it's a load of crap. They don't want people together. You know, it rings of you know, there was some of those White House tapes came out with Nixon, and there was a quote that I can't forget because I'm you know, whatever, everybody knows what I am, but he said, "We can't let them damn hippies and them niggers and them Jews get together and smoke pot and read and talk." That's almost now. That's I paraphrased it, but that's a very close to a quote of Richard Nixon.
It's almost a direct quote.
Almost a direct quote, and he did include all those groups, and it's like, what? So us Negroes and Keuchels and hippies can't get? What do you mean by that?
I think he just really meant the common people, didn't he? The common people can't get together and understand what's going on. Because dividing the community is dividing the fact that people understand what's going on. Because the more you have a community, the more that people talk, the more that people realize that it's affecting everybody else in the same way, and the more problems you realize that the community has, and you can do something about it.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Have you guys read The Fate of Empires? It's a very short essay.
I haven't.
I forget the name of the writer. I'll have to look it up. But it's a very interesting short essay, which talks about the life cycle of your average great civilization and empire. And so America would be the empire now in the essay, and England was the last one, and goes back in time. But it's interesting that
John Glubb.
Sorry,
John Glubb.
That's right. Yes. So anyway, he sort of identifies this pattern, and it goes from the great outburst when this obscure people just come out of nowhere and they're fearless and they take on bigger armies, into the age of conquest. Now they've adopted better technology and they build their empire, and they're incredibly, you know, there's political consensus between the people. They've got a strong sense of who they are. They've got a strong sense of a shared interest, and they achieve remarkable things. And anyway, it goes on, and then they get rich, and towards the end you come into the age of decadence, and this is what he calls sort of the high noon of the empire. And I think that's where the West is today. There's remarkable similarities. I mean, for instance, he talks about the Arab decline in the 9th century, and some of the similarities he brings out to today, things like increased materialism, atheism, even feminism. Yes, in 9th century Baghdad, like women were trying to get into male professions and all this kind of thing. And the historians at the time always lamented the degeneracy and the lack of religion, the contemporary historians at the time. But the guy says when he wrote it, when he did the research, you know, he just couldn't believe how similar it was to today's West. All the same signs of sort of moral bankruptcy and just very bizarre activity. And Camelia Paglia, I think she's called, she also identifies transgenderism as something that happens before great collapses of civilizations. So what do you guys think that we may be in sort of an end of the West period?
Oh, I do, absolutely. I mean, you've only got to look at the financial state of the West at the moment, and as you say, it's almost like it's human nature, isn't it? Once you reach a certain level of comfort. I'm talking about the state of the financial markets, the banks, the financial institutions that were basically given a sticking plaster after 2008. What I mean is, when an empire collapses, common sense, not only does it morally collapse, but it financially collapses as well, which is one of the main things that brought Rome down in the end. But
not necessarily. They don't all go bankrupt, or it doesn't always turn out dreadfully.
Yeah, not all of them. No,
the Spanish Empire collapsed, and Spain just went back to being a nation state.
Yeah,
I mean, so it doesn't always, but very often, what happens at the collapse is invasion, either from within, because another feature is that all empires, because they're so rich, the capital cities become multicultural. And then, you know, it can be subverted, or the character of the place changes anyway. And these people get invaded either from within or from a stronger force from outside.
Yeah. So I agree with you. Yeah, I think we must be pretty close. I don't know how far we've still got left to run, but I should imagine if there's any indication of it, our elite will be making contingency plans anyway, because I can't imagine they want to be, you know, want us going to places like the Hamptons and, you know, people pulling them out of their mansions and hanging them from the street lamps, will they?
Yeah, well, they'll be the first to go. They will be the first to
go. Exactly. They would be the first to go. And
then, you know, here's one little quick issue is that what I think will happen if it's the end of the West is that it will quickly decline in the same people that have mental acuity, the stick-to-itiveness, the desire to lead, the desire to follow a good leader, the knowledge to know the difference, knowledge of whatever it may be. Because understand, if the end of the West comes, don't be under any illusion. Disabuse yourself of some utopian notion. That's out of the question. It's ridiculous. What that will mean is feudal states and an absolute apocryphal, not apocryphal existence. In other words, Armageddon, anyone, is what I'm saying. That's what it will be if the West is at an end. It will be utter Antifa running riot in a much larger way. Well, I think that will last maybe tops 5 years, probably not nearly that long. I'd give it 6 months. And then something will come from that. And as we've seen in the past in history, what comes from that will be a more free society. So I really hope it happens and I live through it and it happens tomorrow.
Yeah, I just want to add to this before we move on. Generally, it takes strong men to build a society. It takes complacent men to keep a society. And it takes weak men to lose a society. Yes. So using that point of thinking, and you can change society for civilization or change it for empire, whatever word you want to use. But generally the concept's the same. If you want to take that theory, then at this point in time, we have the left that are in control, which, as everybody has said, is virtue signaling, which means that they're just trying to point and demigrate for everybody to be happy, which is not going to work. The saying that if you try not to offend everybody, you will end up offending someone. So it wouldn't really matter anyway. So just be yourself. So that is going to fail. That point of system will fail. The left in itself will fail. That's why I think that the political shifts for democracies are very, very important, because the difference between an empire and a democracy is an empire is generally run by a monarchy or a form of monarchy with a form of government. It's generally almost an authoritarian type of point. That's why it's called an empire. Yeah. So with the form of democracies, I would say that we have the chance of being able to change it, which is the whole point of what this discussion was, to say that I think that the right is taking over on the internet, and I think that the actual pendulum, or the elastic band, if you will, is getting ready to snap so it can swing back to the right-hand side.
That is the point you made over an hour and a half ago. Or that's good point. Good point.
Yeah. Yeah, I quite agree. I think going to come back, but when it does, common sense, it's going to come back very quick, isn't it?
Well, but Bollocks, it just struck me that is the topic he brought up, and it's taken us, it carried us this far along.
No, it beautifully brought it full circle.
Brilliant. Yeah.
All right, I think a couple of options on the table for England. America is a bit more of a complicated case, perhaps, or there are just different possibilities that could happen in America. Like in America, I think
well, don't bloody look at me when you want to answer to this, whatever it is.
But you've got 330 million people governed from a single city. You know, it's governed by Washington. It just seems absurd, and I don't think it can. The political divides within the society now are so extreme, and you've got people, you know, literally fighting in the streets. So I think this is the beginning of sort of the end for America as it is as a political concept, as it is as a nation today. I do think we'll see secession. We'll see more movements for secession, and once one goes, the rest will go. And I don't necessarily think that will result in civil war. I think it could be peaceful separation or done via negotiation on the whole. But in England, we are already in the midst of an invasion, and there's not a lot of land or space. There aren't that many cities. Every single city is multicultural now, meaning it's majority non-Brit.
I agree with your point. I agree with your point.
We've already sort of, I think, without the dramatic change that you're hoping for, Common Sense Cat. I always call you Common Sense Cat, not Common Sense Guy. Sorry, but without that change, I don't know. You're hoping for a lot, because it really is dramatic what needs to be done to ensure the survival.
That was going to be my point.
People in Britain.
That was going to be my point. Brexit. The point that it's already started. It's already started to now form to right. The fact that we're going to be leaving a socialist utopian idea of the EU, and yet other people in the EU are also leaving it. I think that's the change that needs to happen. That's the elastic band that's snapping. The point that everybody is waking up and realizing, no, it's better to look after ourselves and build ourselves up, and we can interact with everybody that way, rather than trying to live under one nation. That was the point that I was trying to make with everybody starting to move right. The fact that we've already done it with Brexit, Poland's thinking of doing it, Hungary's thinking of doing it, Czech Republic at the moment are thinking of doing it. Even Croatia have come out and said that they're thinking of doing it.
Don't forget France.
Well, France said that they might do if Macron would ever let them.
Which, of course, will never happen.
Yeah.
Not as long as he's in charge. Yeah. Okay, I'd like to ask a question then, just on this sort of huge demographic change we're seeing in England. So it's been reported that between 2050 and 2070, Islam will be the majority religion in the UK, and by around 2070, whites will be a minority. Now, will Britain really be? Will that? Do you think that will happen? Does it matter? What are your thoughts on that?
First of all, it won't happen because it's only under the projected growth that's happening at the moment. And even if you were to keep the exact same amount of things that are happening at this moment in time, it still wouldn't reach that number, because people in the Middle East would run out before we get to that number. So that's one point. Second of all,
I'll just like to add a correction that this includes birth rates.
Yes, no, I understand, but it also includes the rate of immigration as well. More importantly, the same as what it is at this moment in time, or 2016, I believe, which was around 336,000 people coming in at one time, I believe.
I don't know. I guess that it's done with different amounts of immigration, but it's between 2050 and 2070 these changes are going to take place.
Well, okay, I missed that point.
Summarize the information from various demographers and studies and whatever.
No, that's fine. I'll miss that. I'll miss that point then. I don't think it would get to the point of being the most used religion. I think generational people will leave the faith, the same as it takes to second and fourth generations of people generally don't go to the faith. So I think after the fourth generation, they don't generally stay with Muslims anyway. They normally integrate into society more. And have it as a background sort of thing like Christians do, or as we would do. We would have a Christianized idealism, but we wouldn't be of that faith. It would definitely matter. It would definitely matter. But if people were integrated, I don't think it would matter too much because of race mixing. I think we would generally end up becoming one sort of race anyway. Now, am I saying that's a good thing or a bad thing? I don't really know. On that point, yes, I'm white. I would like my race to stay the same, but at the same time, would I be too bothered if we're integrating and coming as one race? It wouldn't really bother me because that would be a point of evolution. So I think I'm not too bothered on that. As long as culture doesn't change too much, I wouldn't be too bothered on the racial demographic.
So you wouldn't see a connection between the sort of shared genetics of a people and the culture that they produce? Like, if you get into genetics, like, there's a very all-right argument, by the way, but the basic premise is that your biology determines your behavior.
No, it's not. It's not. If I may mediate a little bit, it's not all right for you to argue that, but give your answer now. Let's don't look at it. Let's not look at it like that.
We're not bothered about ideologies. Just ask the questions. We're not bothered about ideologies.
So carry on.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's a point of genetics, because if you have somebody that was supposed to be, as you said before, sub-Saharan African, for instance, if you were to take their child away before it was integrated properly, and then you'd put it into America, yes, that child would have a slightly higher IQ than what it would do in sub-Saharan Africa due to education and the point of nurture. Now, I'm not saying that it would be extremely higher, but I'm saying that it would demographically be higher than what it would be generally. That person would then integrate and have sexual relations with, say, somebody who's white or somebody who's black, who's got a very high IQ, for instance. That baby is then going to have a generalization of that point. So that baby would then be slightly higher, and so on and so forth. That's how genetics would obviously work. It takes the best from both sets of races, for instance, to create one particular race or whatever, or mixed race. So that would be my answer to that one. I think that genetics and evolution generally takes the best of each race and would make it better. Am I saying that would happen all the time? No, of course not, but it would happen generally.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think if we radically change the genetics of the British people, of the British population, we will see a big change in behavioral outcomes at a group level, which will have impacts on, you know, whatever you want to call culture, the kind of music created, the kind of food cooked, and the way people behave and interact with one another, common customs and sayings and whatever. I think that would change undeniably.
I'd like to give you a great example of that, if I may. When the United States here, as we know it now, was started with English-speaking people that looked like the whole 9 yards. It was English colonies. We talk about the 13 original colonies. We got songs about it. They were British colonies. And so if we look at what's happened now, French came here, Bulgarians came here, Hungarians, Czechoslovakians, Germans. I could go on, but we understand it'd be ad nauseum. They all came here. They started to integrate themselves, but also keep, you know, chunks of their culture. So I'm saying now that it's even with integration. And look, we have 3 Englishmen here, and I really care deeply for 2 of them, and I know another one and really like his videos. But can you lot say that I am a lot like you, other than the language and whatnot? I mean, I think we're vastly different, right?
No, I'd have to agree that we're different, but I'd like to add a different point to that as well.
Yep. No, I made my point. That was my point.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just want to add to it as well. You make an extremely good point with different people coming in. I mean, us being British or English or whatever you want to call, when you went out, did you have a kebab when you were going home? When you went out, did you have a curry going home? Well, guess what? They're not English and not British. But yet we've integrated and they've integrated into us and they're part of our culture.
Yeah, I think what maybe on the offensive point is that we are actually importing now a culture that has not and never has any intention of integrating into the host nation it intends to go into, and that they do have a history.
Only because of sheer numbers. Only because of sheer numbers. Beforehand, if it was in the 1990s, Muslims were still coming over. After all, there's over 1 billion of them in the world.
Mm-hmm.
If they were coming over slowly, they integrate. Everybody integrates. If I went over to a different country, I would slowly integrate with them. Same as they come over to here, they would slowly integrate if they had no other choice. It's the fact that we put them into ghettos and we put them into different areas where they've now intoxicated themselves with themselves, and their culture has blossomed between themselves, so they don't have to learn English because they can speak to their mate that's down the road or go to their mosque or whatever. It's the case that they have not integrated properly. That's not proper immigration. That's just a force of coming over and taking over, as on the offensive has alluded to before. But if you were going to have immigration done properly and the way it used to be done, people immigrate different parts of culture, and the culture then gets integrated into the whole spectrum of culture. And as he was saying before on the offensive about food, music, and things like that, that's how rhythm and blues started. That's how hip hop started. That's how country and western started, and all the different forms of music started. That's all different forms of culture coming together and accepting it. That's not.
Yeah. But I would like to point out also that everything that you just named, because you have to go, well, except for hip hop. I think that's the only one. Everything else you named, you have to go back to the times of Jim Crow and extreme segregation, and where white people lived one place, black people lived another, Hungarian people lived over here, Polish people lived over there, French people. We still have it in Michigan very heavily. If you go to Detroit, Hamtramck, it's being overrun by other folks, but it's, you know, we have that. So to get these blendings that you're talking about, common sense, we get these things in two ways: assimilation, and I would say stronger. And I don't know, man, we already had it called and classified by somebody that I know wasn't just trying to but it's whatever. People can call me what they want. But segregation and assimilation. And I mean segregation in a good way, not forced, but allowed segregation, because now what we have is forced integration, and I really need to leave it at that. Forced integration, this is also very, very bad.
I agree with you on a point, but the thing is what you're saying about, as you said, forced segregation, or segregation in itself, is a case of what the point was that I was saying that's bad, because it's happening on such a high level, because there is no control on immigration. It's happening to a point where people can make their own cultures and live in mini Pakistan, live in mini India, live in mini Somalia, wherever they want to call it. And that's
but we agree that's not a good thing.
No, it's not a good thing, and that's why I'm worried why you said that's part of it.
And that's why. Sorry, that's why I think On the Offensive said what he said, because of the fact that it doesn't look, and it's very unlikely that immigration policy is going to change. It's just going to carry on bringing in, what was it, about 300? Well, no, it's half of that, isn't it? The
no, that was the net figure of 2016. That was the net figure, 336.
Yeah, but that included
6,000.
That included European, Eastern European immigration as well.
No, so that was every single form of including African as well.
That's what I mean. It included everything. But what he's alluding to is the fact of people coming in from, you know, the Asian or African continents with this, you know, and coming in such large numbers. Now, obviously, what you said before is when we had a sensible immigration policies pre the sort of new Labour government, where you had maybe an immigration of around about, I don't know, 50 to 100,000 or less. They're coming in smaller numbers. They're much more easy to integrate because they're put into small enclaves. They have to integrate because there's a small community. But for this to work again, the idea is that suddenly we have to bring immigration down to these sensible levels. There's no will on our establishment's part to do so. The only nation in the Well, what is it?
I disagree with that. The fact that I know everybody's going to say, oh, yeah, Theresa May was horrible when she was at Home Secretary. And I agree, she was. But her policy was trying to bring everything down to 100,000 in immigration. She could not do that due to the fact of, obviously, European legislation of freedom of movement. There was no way in hell she was ever going to do that. So the fact that if she doesn't, after today, say that she's going to stick in the customs union, so we have to agree to freedom of movement, we can then control our immigration again and actually have borders rather than having freedom of movement. It's the point of the fact that we have freedom of movement at the moment that is fucking up the whole of our country.
Hang on, by the way, if I ask you that, then why is she still allowing the 150,000 coming from outside the EU to come in, even though we don't? There is no rules within the EU that we have to let them in. Only people within the 28 countries of the EU.
Because we still like to have people that we actually want rather than actual just trade.
What, 150,000 of them?
Yeah, a lot of people actually come from India and Pakistan, not Pakistan, India and China, and a lot of Americans come over, a lot of Dutch people, not Dutch people.
But I think he meant just the sheer number, 150,000.
Yeah, these are the 150 coming from, what's good. And
let me ask you a question. Yeah. What's 150,000 compared to 65 million people in percentage?
A shitload.
Yeah, it doesn't sound a lot, but it soon adds up quick.
It's not the 150,000 is not much. Remember, those people are not always staying in this country.
I would ask this common sense without beating up on you, because it seems like we have people.
No, carry on. I'm happy.
Yeah, I know you are. I know this just floats your boat. So let me just beat your ass, because I know you'll come back. So look, it's not just the number; it's the number at one time. So when you take this, in other words,
I'm not arguing that. I'm agreeing with you.
I can take a little bit of arsenic and put it in this drink, and I can drink it, it won't even hurt me. But if I put a certain amount, keep it coming, and I drink that same amount every day, just that same amount, that wouldn't hurt me. Eventually, I'm going to drink my last bloody bitter, and
of course.
Can I just say, I'd like to hear on the offensive's opinion on this as well, if that's okay.
Cheers.
To the point of integration and assimilation. So people integrate as much as they have to survive. You don't normally want to do it. You don't want to give up your culture and your identity, who you are. It's very difficult to do it. I'd say in some cases, it's pretty impossible to completely assimilate yourself into a foreign culture. I've lived in Vietnam for many years. I'm not Vietnamese, and I'll never be Vietnamese. It doesn't work like that. And now if I went to America, perhaps I could say that I was an American. Maybe that's a different story there. But I think there's certainly, when it's drastically different people, you're not going to get a guy from Somalia becoming a Brit. It doesn't work like that. So I think in many cases, integration, assimilation is kind of a utopian fantasy. It doesn't really exist. And as Oga brought up with the self-segregation in America, you have no laws anymore saying that you have to do that. If anything, you have laws forcing people together. And yet you go into a church and it's going to be a monoracial church, like in America, almost every time. I think something like 85% of churches in America are monoracial. And that says a lot about just human nature, how people are, how they behave. They like to be around people who are similar to them because then they understand what's going on and they don't feel disorientated. So when Common Sense guys said we put them in ghettos, they ghettoize themselves. They want to live together. They don't want to integrate into British society. They're not forced to, and they can still survive economically on an economic basis without having to integrate or try to assimilate themselves into our culture. So there's really, I think you're fighting against human nature with some of these beliefs that people are going to become British. Maybe cross-generationally it can happen, but certainly new immigrants, I don't think so.
And as I said before, I never argued that those immigrants, first generation, would. To go against, obviously, all of your points, first of all, I never said that immigration at this point in time is a good thing. I've always said that it's a bad thing, but I said that it's Europeans' fault, as in having freedom of movement. It's too much, it's too quick, it's too much. Self-segregation, yes, it does work to a degree, but as long as people are going to work, they still assimilate to the culture. That's the difference. That's the biggest difference that we're having a problem with at the minute. The fact that even when you had Jim Crow, people were still trying to take the bus and they had to integrate with whites and blacks. Yes, wasn't always good interaction, but they had to integrate. People, when they went to offices, they had to integrate. So when working, they would have to integrate with other races, and people realize that there's nothing wrong, and they would integrate with the cultures, had a bit to theirs, had a bit to ours, hence why our culture is an English culture. I mean, for God's sake, we have curry, which is Indian. We have fish and chips, which is French. We have kebab, which is Turkish and Middle Eastern.
Man, every time you say fish and chips is French, it makes me hurt inside.
It does me as well. It does me as well. It really does me as well. But I have to point that out every time because people think, oh, fish and chips is predominantly British. It's not.
All right, Common Sense, listen, before these other boys, and this is all I'm going to say, and I'm going to let them go because you and I are too good at mates for us to argue on live. I'm only going to say this one thing, and that's it. Can you at least consider that what you're talking about is an assimilation of cultures where you get the best of those cultures, yet they still even speak with your accent? Whoever has not noticed, I say bloody and isn't it? I mean, the things that I have changed in my vocabulary because I hang out with the Britisher and with Magic Bollocks and with the academic agent, with, of course, the Common Sense guy, my main mate. And it's rubbed off. And not only that, I want to be part of the crew. I want to be part of the group. And my group usually includes...
Exactly, you want to assimilate.
Okay, so that's my only question to you. Can you see that what the argument that you're making, however valid, almost feels to me like an appeal to emotion? Because
no,
we're
not.
Okay, and I'll leave it at that and let the rest of the boys.
The reason why it's definitely not is because if you went down to California, they would have a different dialect or regional dialect to what somebody in Michigan's going to have. And somebody in Texas is going to have something completely different to somebody in Washington. The same as in London, somebody's got a completely different accent to somebody in the Southwest. Does that make them any less British or English than what it does for the Americans to be different? Of course it doesn't. The point of trying to say that regional dialect means anything is absolutely ridiculous and shouldn't even be brought up as a bloody argument, to be honest. And I'm not trying to say that as a moralistic high ground either. I'm just trying to say that regional dialect changes with the national people that are in the country anyway. So why would it matter if people from India have a different accent and still talking English? Why would it matter
to quickly answer that and let the lads move on and have at you, no, they're all Americans, and of course they're all British. But I believe that does play into the great melting pot that I'm trying to get.
No, I agree. The melting pot's the best idea. The melting pot's the best idea. I'm not arguing against it. I'm saying it needs to be staggered rather than forcing it the way that it has been forced. That's the only argument that I have.
This is the thing. I agree with what common sense says in terms of we had an immigration policy in the West, and up until probably the 2000s, it was working just fine because we had an acceptable number of people who were coming in. I mean, even when the EU was formed and then the freedom of movement rules came in the later 90s, we never had a problem with that initially because of the fact that the European Union only consisted of mostly Western European countries of similar wealth. So if a German came over here, he'd probably be earning roughly the same as he would back in Germany, and living standards would be roughly the same. Then obviously we had the old Soviet bloc countries joining in 2004. They're obviously considerably poorer countries. They could make considerably more money by moving to the West. That's why we had a massive amount of immigration coming from there. Now, that's obviously part of the reason why, particularly working class people in the UK, when we were given the choice, we voted to leave the European Union. And one of the main problems I've always had with, not with obviously the vote, that was something we definitely needed, but the unwillingness of our leaders to address the other problem, which is obviously non-EU immigration, because of the fact that that's been running at ridiculously high levels for, well, again, since the early 2000s. And obviously the Eastern Europeans were an easy target because of the fact of freedom of movement, because they can come. Hopefully, like common sense is predicting, once Brexit is completed, so long as it happens the way we hope it will, then we can put up obviously restrictions on the numbers that come in. But I am not a believer in that they will ever do that. I hope I'm proved wrong, but I genuinely believe that is the plan, to carry on bringing in hundreds of thousands of people into the country every year. You know, they say we're getting the same amount of the population of Coventry every year, and we have done since the mid-noughties. And it's just completely unsustainable in terms of what infrastructure we have in place and what sort of jobs and opportunities there are for everybody. And the only people who are actually, benefiting for this are the people at the very top, the government and the corporations. And in terms of our own culture, I think that culture is a very important thing to a nation, and we should do our utmost to make sure anybody coming into this country has to integrate and not be just dumped into areas that then become ghettos because nobody's even bothered to try and integrate anybody. It's the whole sort of complete lack of responsibility on our peers for allowing this to happen in the first place, just so that their corporate backers can make a few quid. And in, say, another 40 or 50 years, I can't even begin to imagine what Britain will look like. We might have found the answer to all our problems by then, or it could be, as On the Offensive said, we could be demographically very, very different.
And culturally and in every way conceivable, in all the ways that make our country special. I think a lot could be lost. I think you brought up a really good point, Magic Bollocks, when you were talking about, excuse me, the Eastern European bloc joining the EU, and all those people coming, there's a huge difference between different kinds of immigrants. Like, I really couldn't give a shit if a Frenchman decided to come and live in England. I'd be like, all right, come on in. You know, I mean, we're not that different. You know, we're not. I know that the Brits will go, oh, bloody French, they're arrogant and all that stuff, and we take the piss out of them. They are culturally different. They've got a different language and a different history, a slightly different history of food, but they're still Europeans. They're across the other side of the pond. This is not the same as somebody from a very impoverished country coming in with a completely different skill set and educational background and all this stuff. And it's definitely, you know, when Common Sense Guy, when you're talking about EU immigration being a big problem, I do understand that. But for me, the real worrying one is non-EU immigration. You know, particularly Pakistani immigration. That to me is the biggest problem.
I agree with you completely. I agree with you completely. I don't ever want to say that I'm saying the Eastern Bloc or people from Germany or people like that. The reason why I say European migration is because as soon as anybody from Africa gets into Europe, they get given European passports. They become European migrants, as you all are aware. They get classified as Europeans. That's what I mean by European migration, not somebody from Germany or France or Spain or Portugal or Romania or wherever.
Okay, I see. I misunderstood you. I'm sorry. But yeah, I think, you know, when we go back to the earlier questions of demographics and culture and stuff, I think that there could be a huge impact from letting in so many people from the Middle East. I mean, it feels like madness to me. I don't think there's ever any hope of integration or assimilation there. They're so fundamentally different.
When did the term change? Because a bit like with, remember when climate change used to be global warming, and then the term changed, didn't it? Once upon a time, they used to talk about multiracial societies, didn't they? But then somewhere, I don't know if it was the 90s or 2000s, it changed to multicultural. Because I've never had a problem with the idea of multiracial societies. That's fine, and no problem with that at all. Because as long as the culture is the same, you know, I mean, obviously, America does have its problems, but in a community where you've got blacks and whites and the culture is roughly the same, everybody's fine. But it's when you keep mixing in these completely incompatible cultures that you get these problems, and that's exactly what's happening. And at the moment, the biggest one, of course, is Islam. Islam is completely incompatible with the cultures of the West.
Yep.
Because it's not tolerant.
Yep. I completely agree with that. It's like Sargon did that thing about beautiful cultures, where he goes into like places like Pakistan and a couple of other island nations, for instance, which some of them are cannibalistic, where the left will come up with this idea of saying, yeah, but those cultures are beautiful and they're valid and we should accept them for who they are. No, they're fucking cannibals. And if you want to go to places like Pakistan...
excuse me.
If your girl gets raped, and you go to a tribunal, their law is, well, the mum or the dad or the person who did the raping is going to get raped instead. That's their law out there. Sargon did a video on it with all of his citations. So yes, the actual culture in itself just doesn't fucking work. It just doesn't at all.
Common Sense, you're going to wring my neck, but I feel like it's incumbent on me. How much time do we have with you on the offensive? We have been ringing you out. It is 6 in the morning his time, folks. If I don't have that wrong, it's not like this is
No, I feel all right. I'm not doing anything. Saturday.
Cheers. Just want to make sure, because I'm sure that the Common Sense Guy is not going to let his first show go off without us all having our last words.
Of course.
And you've been very kind, I must say. I'm sure that our main host, Common Sense Guy, and that our court jester, Magic Bollocks, would agree with that.
But no, your point of multiculturalism is an absolute valid point. The fact that it changed from multiracialism because people weren't racist anymore. That was the point. Most people just don't give a shit about races anymore. So what, you're black, I don't really give a shit. Do you still speak the same language as I do? Do you still want the same things? So what, you're from Asia. Do you speak the same language? Do you want the same things? Yes, you do. Well, I don't give a shit. Come join me for a beer. It doesn't matter about race anymore. The fact that it's now changed to multiculturalism is the idea of creating, as we said before and touched on, the point of cultural Marxism, being able to create a demographic to say that it's oppressed.
Yeah, Yeah, just like we said earlier on, it's back to that one group who wants to push that ideology.
Yep.
Yeah.
At least that's my opinion. What does everybody else think?
I think in a way, chaps, I'm going to have to disagree with you a bit. I do see a relationship between multiracialism and multiculturalism. I'm not sure, you know, it's a hard nut to crack, like how much is just the way you're raised and where you're born versus your sort of genetics and your biology. It's a mesh, right, that makes a person of those two things. So you can definitely have, you know, success stories and wonderful people coming in from around the world.
Say for instance, for sake of argument, say that they're all third generational or fourth generational, and they don't have any grandparents left anymore, and they're all integrated into proper schools of any country that you want to use.
Yeah.
Would they then at that point become part of the culture?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I imagine so. Sure, cross-generationally, yeah, probably would. But
that's the point of culture then, isn't it? Not a point of race.
Well, yeah, I suppose. But what I'm saying is that there is just a relationship there between.
There is a correlation. I'll give you that. It depends on the generation of it, but there is a correlation.
Yeah. So if you radically change these things, you know, and I don't know, I just do see them as related. So multiracialism and multiculturalism, it's kind of like, well, what's the real difference there? I mean, you're saying, well, there's no difference, but I mean, whenever you have a multiracial society, it is always inevitably multicultural.
Well, the thing is I wouldn't say, I said it can work. I didn't say necessarily did work, because I acknowledge that there are problems. Like, why is it disproportionately in black communities that you find gang violence and gang culture?
Because they're not integrated properly. That's the problem, that they've now gone into their own ghettos and they're now forming their own subculture away from everybody else. That's the problem. You look at Chicago, for instance, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, I think 98% black. Is that right, Roger?
Oh, it depends upon where you're talking about. Chicago, South Chicago, it's up in the 90s. Yes.
Is that self-segregated though?
Well, I mean, listen, folks. I said it before. Okay, there's a culture in. Well, let's use Chicago. There's a culture in Chicago right now in certain parts, and I go to Chicago. Me and Mrs. Ogre, and my business partner, we go to Chicago at least twice a year. We can stay at the Hilton on the Miracle Mile. Man, it's so beautiful. Anyway, and when we go there, we go to Buddy Guy's right behind the Hilton, and right off Michigan Avenue, and we go to King's Pizza, and everything's really expensive, man. I had a shot of whiskey called the Whistling Pig. It was 30 quid. I shit you not, for a shot. I shit you not, and it's beautiful, but that area, there's a lot of white people. There's some black people. There's a lot of Asian people, probably more than there is white people in the places where so now if you go south of there, yes, there's South Chicago, 90% black. Is that relevant? Maybe, but what there is there's crack cocaine. Just like I'm talking about the other things, I'm gonna tell you what's there. There's crack cocaine, there's prostitutes, there's any kind of drug or whatever that you'd want. I'm not even saying drugs.
Is there more social housing, for instance, in South
Chicago?
Chicago?
Of course, yes, block after block. I mean, South Chicago is famous for it, mate.
That's their block.
Block after block.
Is there really cheap housing as well, also in that area?
Oh,
I imagine so. If they're social.
To be perfectly honest, if you were to, man, I wish I could take you there because you'd see what I'm trying to. What I can't. I have a very short time to tell you. Yes and no. Right around the housing blocks, that government blocks, whatever you would call them, the projects, there are really cheap houses, but really cheap by that I mean 1,000, 1,500 quid a month, and right in the same area. Just depends upon where you're at. There'll be these little stretches where they gentrified it, and they will have flats that go for $4,000 a month.
Yeah.
And so, yes and no, but for the most part, to answer your question, no. And I could go on, but you see what I mean?
That's the idea of self-segregation, though. The fact of it is you buy what you can afford, and if you can only afford social housing, then you get put into particular areas. Now, if more people in that area are going to be black, then they're going to conjugate in one particular area. That's all I meant.
No, and I can't stress enough that let's remember, we're talking about Chicago, and we're talking about something that used to be self-segregated, but now is forced segregated. So in self-segregation, yes, there was majority black on the south side, majority Puerto Rican and Mexican on the north side, majority white and actually Polish, Italian and Canadian and Central, and there's others mixed in there. But now forced integration, you have these. Oh my good Lord. You don't. The only place you can go is where I spoke of, where the four of us lot would sit there, and you, of course, would all look at the Jew at the end of the night to pay the bloody tab, because beers are $12 a beer, and you know, a shot of good whiskey is 30 quid. And so, if I said, you'll look at me.
Can I come in here? So
yeah, of course.
You know, the self-segregation, forced segregation thing in America. There's obviously the hangover of Jim Crow, where they had zoning laws and only black people could only live in certain areas. So you do have like areas that, you know, were historically like black ghettos. But let's just think. Okay, I mean, they are now free to move where they like, and you know, it's a totally different situation. But they do remain in these areas. There's a video online of driving through Detroit, which as we know, you know, used to be a white city and then transformed into a predominantly black one. And there's cars on fire. There are like young girls like twerking outside liquor stores, and just horrible behavior, prostitutes everywhere, a lot of drug use, and it looks awful. Now you can sort of blame this on, well, they're not integrated or whatever, but the people have chosen to behave like this. This is the culture that they've chosen to behave to create, and I don't think you can get away from that fact that the people make the place. You know, if you switched it up with, I don't know, like if you switched a village with you know, and put the same people in that video in my lovely village in England, they would do exactly the same thing. And that's, you know, that's just sort of a reality of life. It's not a very nice one, I suppose, but I think it's undeniable that it's not the government forcing them to behave like this, or welfare dependency that's, you know, broken apart their society. I mean, that's part of it. You know, there are other factors.
I never suggested that.
Well, and I gotta interject very quickly too. I want to get this in your mind as you carry on the offensive. Before, when you talk about black ghettos, before forced integration, before it was supposed to be starting to make it egalitarian, they were very safe. The marriage rate was up in the 70s. I think it was high 78%. This is during Jim Crow, all these things. And now the black ghettos are, so, I mean, if you could keep that in mind also, I mean, any answer you could give to that or any solution to this kind of thing. I mean, what on earth, we think about these things, and common sense makes some good points. Yes, we have Curry, and I can't go through it all. We know what we're talking about. But where do we draw the line and say, no, birds of a feather flock together? It doesn't mean that one bird thinks it's fucking better than the other fucking bird. We just want to have our own birds, and that we all seem to do better that way, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you, Edgar. And you make a good point about the staggering. Thomas Sowell wrote a lot about that, the decline of black communities in America. I wonder if it's because all of the intelligent, like, I mean, around what, 78%, I think, of blacks in America are in the working class or above. So they're not in those ghettos. So really what you've got, I mean, I imagine this is going to sound really harsh, Jesus, but like, you know, most blacks in America are doing well. And then you've got this left behind who never got it out of the Jim Crow neighborhood. You know, they never got out of that area. And I suspect.
Can I ask a quick question?
I can't say it. It's so harsh, but I suspect that.
Can I ask a quick question first? Because I know where you're going. Would you say that that's to do with the fact that they live in the Jim Crow, or because generationally they've lived in Jim Crow and formed their own culture away from the integration of America in itself?
Ah.
So what, is it all Jim Crow, or? or is it?
No. Because of Jim Crow, it gives them the opportunity, so to speak, for that demographic of people to form their own culture because they're generally away from America culture in itself, as in working and things like that. So generally, they have formed their own culture. Do you think that's due to the fact that they have been away from the American culture in itself, or do you think that's the idea of them making their own culture in their own, shall we say, colony?
Well, I don't know. It's very complex issue that. Obviously they were forced to segregate, right? So there was no choice then. But they've been. When did Jim Crow end, Oga?
1960.
1960.
Yeah, I want to say 1963. It might have been but it was early 60s.
Yeah, I mean, so that's a long time. What is that? 3 generations. Nearly
possibly 4 generations.
So long that I wasn't born when it happened, and I'm an old ogre.
Yeah, yeah. So the fact that this persists, I think, just shows something that's true and inherent in human nature. But clearly, I mean, they used to have much more tightly knit and safer communities with higher marriage rates and less infidelity and so we can look at things like, the war on drugs or welfare, the disruptive and negative effects of welfare dependency on a community, and the fact that all of the smart blacks have left the ghettos and are now working in nice, they're living in nice neighborhoods away from all of that.
Which is the point of what I was trying to say about the generational point of causing a culture. The fact is, you quite rightly said, it's now a 2nd to 3rd generation of people that are now in that area where their mother was able to have 2 or 3 children by themselves, so they kicked daddy out, so to speak, or dad's not expected to be there, so he can buck and run.
Yeah, or he's in prison.
Or he's in prison for selling a bit of weed, whatever. Yeah. But the part of the culture that has now been developed in that area, is that due to American culture or the culture they have created themselves? Or choose to create. I'll use that word instead. Choose to create.
Yeah, I think that this is a sort of a natural phenomenon. So it's not like you can blame a single individual for it. It's how the group have sort of chosen to behave. But again, you can't blame all blacks, right? Like America,
that's the difference. That's the difference, though. That's the point that I was trying to make. Obviously, people outside of that social housing sort of issue, as you said before, the ghettos in itself, they have that type of culture. But if you go to a different demographic, say as what Oga said, we're in between the borders, for instance, that are not in social housing, and you have the demographic of blacks in South Chicago, for instance, that are different to the people that are in social housing, that would be a different culture because they have integrated more into American culture rather than sticking generationally to the culture they created.
Yeah. Well, I would say that those blacks who aren't there haven't been involved in the generation of that culture and that gang culture.
That's exactly what I was saying. That they generationally integrated into American culture rather than generationally evolved into the culture they created themselves in the ghetto.
So you would say that like this black criminality or shitholes like Detroit are going to be a thing of a past? Like they're in the decline?
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the shitholes like Chicago, for instance, or Detroit or wherever, they would still be exactly the same, but only generationally going to get worse because it's generationally accepted. The fact is they need to be separated and then reintegrated for that to change. The culture needs to change by reintegration rather than it being allowed to perpetuate the ideas that is going on at the moment, like the Crips and the Bloods and the things like that. Those ideas need to be stripped away and changed by forcing them to have reintegration.
So who would do that?
By moving them. Just by moving them. Just move them and put other people that are on welfare and trailer parks and things like that, not in the different countries, but in different areas, to just be able to just integrate into different areas, move them more into low-paid white areas, for instance, and vice versa. Do something like a house swap.
I don't know. I think you might create rather a lot of racial tension if you did that.
Yeah, that sounds very socialistic, that common sense.
No, not particularly. Not particularly, because what I'm trying to say is that you don't have to force the issue on it. You can ask people, do you want to change into different areas? And if somebody's got a trailer park compared to having a house with a garden and things like that, generally, they're not going to really look around the area. They're going to say, yeah, let's have a look and let's take it.
You're going to get race riots if you did that.
You're gonna have social unrest if you try doing that.
Because most of the blacks don't want whites coming into their neighborhood and living there, like, and they will take to the streets, and they'll bring up historical examples like, you know, I think they did this in America too, where they take away the black kids and put them in a white family, but they definitely did that in Australia, and they bring up that, and social justice warriors would go mental, and that's an impossible one.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, that would be the outcome. But
it's a nice idea, and it'd be great if, you know.
No, it's not. It's not a nice idea. Actually, it's not a nice idea.
What I mean, your intention was good. The idea is absolute fucking wank, but
it's a nice idea.
I do kind of get a little bit tired of people always making excuses for criminality. I was talking to I'm not saying anyone here is doing that, right? I'm not saying anyone is doing that like outright, but just when people talk, oh, it's society's fault and stuff. I was talking to a mate the other day about the London riots. You know, 4 people were murdered in those riots. They burnt down their neighbors' businesses. They vandalized small businesses, private property, things like salons and kebab shops were attacked by just thugs in the street, and they looted Adidas shops. And my mate was going, oh, it's society's fault. And that's an expression of their rage, and they're oppressed, and they haven't been, he didn't say this, but maybe he could have said, and they haven't been integrated properly into British society or whatever. And I'm like, no, look, these people are doing it. This is part of their culture to riot like that every now and then and rob. Like, that's part of their shared behavior. And I don't know what the solution is, but I feel like it does kind of ultimately rest on them. Oga, what do you think of that?
Well, I was going to say, I think it's a really good idea to end it there after Oga's last point.
Yeah, because I was just going to say, I'm going to save it for my last word, because we've been talking at the side, and you're a great sport. I can't believe you hung in this long as early as you started, but I'll save it. I think Common Sense Guy has something to say.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go to bed very, very soon. I've been told, and I've been given my marching orders, so to speak. So if everybody wants to have their last words, we'll start with On the Offensive as the guest. We'll move on to Magic Bollocks, then to the Ogre, and then I'll end it.
Why don't one of you guys go first? I'll concoct something as you're going.
I'm not going before this, rookie.
No, it's all right. I'll go first. Give me a chance
no worries.
Think.
Cheers.
I will say to everybody that we are all different because we're all individuals, but sometimes you need to ask yourself, what can I actually bring to the table as opposed to what can I actually take from it? And half the problem we've got these days is too many people are trying to take stuff from the table instead of adding to it. And until we as all individuals can realize that we can get out twice as much if we just put a little bit in. And at the moment, too many people take in, not enough people give in. And that needs to change. I don't know who's got the will to actually make that change. I just hope somebody will come along. Maybe Trump's the man. I don't know. I doubt it. But somebody needs to come along, make a big change, and start making what needs to be done, and fast. Common sense theory that the internet is moving to the right is completely legitimate in my belief. And at the moment, the left, as On the Offensive said, is pretty much in charge of everything. And like once any ideology gets in charge of anything, it becomes authoritarian. And they are doing their utmost now to keep the power, because they can see that pendulum, or the elastic band, is beginning to reach the tipping point, and it is going to go back to the right. And my theory is it will happen very quickly. We've already had an inclination of it, Brexit and Trump, even though I don't necessarily think they are right-wing ideas, more libertarian, I would have thought. But once it goes to the right and the right starts to become the establishment again, they'll also become quite authoritarian. And every ideology has its place. Every ideology has its time. We just have to try our best to try and keep everything as free as possible as we possibly can, and not to allow ourselves to be, you know, under the thumb of some kind of, you know, dictatorial system. Whether or not we'll do that in our lifetimes, don't know. Who knows? But as long as people like us four can carry on debating it, then we know we still have some level of freedom, and long may it last. Yes.
Cheers.
So thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody in the chat. As usual, thank you very much to my panelists on the offensive. It's been an honor, mate, and I hope you come back again soon. Thank you very much, Mr. Ogre. I've got to get this the right way round. And, of course, to our host today, Common Sense, thank you very much for letting us on. And it's been a wonderful experience, this. Let's do it again soon.
Cheers.
Yeah.
I love you on the offensive, but I'm not giving up my spot as going before Common Sense Guy. Okay. you gotta go now, lad. You got a good voice. Use it. You'll be fine.
All right. You know, I always feel put on the spot when I the last time I think I just thanks for having me, and I just want to
do fine. Just carry on, crack on, mate. Chin up.
You guys are great fun to chat to. It's been a thoroughly stimulating discussion, and even waking up at 4 a.m. for it, you know. At the beginning, I'm groggy, but I always get into it because it's so interesting. And I really enjoy our disagreements and just talking about stuff. I think that, you know, there's sort of this, is it within us inherently versus is it the political ideology or the culture has been sort of the divide and how we see society. I think that ultimately history can teach us that political ideology is important. I'm not saying it isn't. And culture and stuff is important, but almost the most important defining feature of a civilization is its spirit, is this will to triumph that defines a people and makes them great. And the West is in an age of decadence and decline. And it's sad, and we wonder, is it all lost? And is there any hope for it? And, oh God, what about this problem? What about that problem? But I think if we can refine a sense of spirit and a belief in ourselves and in old-fashioned values of community, and then there is hope. And just to give a quick example, you know, there have been empires in the past which have regained their course, and it is certainly not all lost, because, you know, men in decadence can be called to action very quickly, time and again, who were enjoying sipping on their tea and living nice middle-class lives, and then told your country's being invaded, get to the trenches, and they do it. And remarkable bravery and courage is still within the British people, and I think we shall triumph. So there you go. There's my final say. Thanks so much for having me.
Bloody brilliant! Thank you so much for that, young man. It's young kids like you that give me a hope in the future. I don't care if you live in some place in Vietnam or if it's like a Cult of Lich and he lives somewhere else. I don't really want to say right now. I don't think he even likes the country broadcasted, but in somewhere closer to you than England is to you now. And I tell you, man, it's yeah, I'm not going to try to be sycophantic or be a simpering fanboy, but I will say this: you and Oozaloo are the two. And the lot here, Common Sense Guy, especially because Bollocks don't do shit. He just sits around and whatever he does. He's got a day job, poor guy. But you three are the ones that I watch. I'm not a, you know, I'm a Sargonite, I guess, in a certain way. And I've got to get to my last word because Common Sense Guy already says he has to go. But without, as I said, cyber filleting you, I will say that, you know, I watch your videos. I wasn't joking about my wife. She likes your stuff. She watches you too. I think you're second only to Razor Fist, and she does like, for whatever it's worth, a beautiful, and I think I can get some an amen on she's beautiful. A beautiful 42-year-old woman somewhere in America would rather you show your face. So for whatever that's worth, take that. Just very quickly, Trump the solution? No. No, I want to go on longer, but I wasted a lot of time right there in the beginning. Didn't waste, but I used it. So no, we're the solution. Web going to the right? Yes. As I said, we're the solution. It's not to the right. There's a balance between logic and illogic. Tonight, we talked about things that were science. We talked about things that were pseudoscience. Some things are logical. Some things are illogical. Some things work. Some things do not. Some things are productive. Some things are counterproductive. There is middle ground in some of these things, especially when we're talking about logical things. And now when it comes down to straight, perfect logic, no, there is no middle ground. There is right and there's wrong. But let's not ever forget, if we can, as I move along quickly, Occam's razor, which says the simplest solution to a problem is usually the correct one. And the two key words are simple and usually. Not always, and it should be simple. The simple solution to the problem that we're facing today would be, hey, you got to integrate. If you're not willing to integrate, if you're part of the problem, if you threw acid in someone's face, doesn't matter if you're second generation, we will deport your entire family. We will deport your family that didn't bother to teach you English. We'll deport them all. And you too. The idea that I've heard recently about, oh, but they're British because they're second generation. We're born. No, they're not British. When they do not speak English, when they do not recognize Guy Fawkes Night as us Yanks recognize Halloween, all of that good stuff that is to be British. They don't appreciate a bland porridge and a hot cup of tea on a cold night. And so just wrapping this up, I'll say that we have to stick together. Birds of a feather flock together, as I said before. And was it better before? This is my final word, common sense, so that you can be prepared. This is it for me. Yes, when we had voluntary do whatever and there will be nothing done to you, i.e., Jim Crow days, but outside of Jim Crow states, because then you say, well, it was forced in Jim Crow. Okay. What about Ohio in the same era? It was very, very segregated, but it was by choice. And then you had the busing. My mother grew up in a little town called Cumberland, Maryland. And she remembers the movie Hairspray. Everybody heard of the movie Hairspray? Well, that was all about the first black kids to dance on TV with white kids. That was broadcast. Anyone? From Baltimore, Maryland. So I'll leave you with this. It was better before. When we let people live where they want to live and be who they want to be and still get that curry on their way home, still get that kebab. And in my case, get that beans and rice with the side of, some kind of carne asada. Well, that's how it's best. And if you want to have bibimbap or whatever them little Vietnamese sandwiches are called, because I should know, I used to live in Orlando, Florida, in Vietnamese town. That's good too. So listen, folks, be good to your friends and family. You never know when they'll leave.
Thank you very much, Ogre, for that one. I'd just like to point out, everybody's done what they wanted to do today. Everybody said what they wanted to say. Everybody's got different opinions. The most amazing thing, as On the Offensive has said before, the fact that people like us that can have different opinions have been able to come on this live stream, express our opinions in, yes, sometimes maybe a bit vigorous, but an absolutely perfect debate form or point of contention. Absolutely amazing topics today. We've been able to touch on lots of different things. Everybody has a different point of view, or rather, 3 people had one view. I had a different one. Fuck you all. But to be fair, on that actual point, the good thing is about this type of thing is that you'd be able to get, sometimes you do get 3 people that are against your opinion. But it's the point, can you defend your opinion by using logic rather than morality? If you can, then stick at it. But as On the Offensive pointed out towards the end, it wasn't a good idea that I said about the housing. It was not a good idea. That would cause a lot of problems. That would cause a lot of divisions. And the fact is that, yeah, as soon as he pointed that out and I worked it through my head, I conceded. Because it was a stupid goddamn idea. And that's the point that you're supposed to do in these type of debates, discussions, whatever word you want to use for this point, is being able to find out what's good about your own points and what's bad about them, and then working out what your ideology actually is and what you can actually do to implement it. Now, none of us are actually politicians, but by God, we've come here, we've been able to talk a lot of common sense, and yes, pun on name, but we have been able to talk a lot of common sense today. And I think it's absolutely amazing that we've been able to do that. We've all had different opinions. We've all been able to say what we wanted. And I think that's absolutely amazing. So without further ado, I bid you farewell, and I'll see you all again real soon. Bye-bye for now.